Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm super excited today about our discussion. I am Scott Allen Davis, Vice President of Inclusion and Economic Development at SEEL, and this is our second quarter webinar. And today we will be talking about data centers. This is a hot topic, and it pulls a lot of emotion from people for various reasons. And I want to be very clear. This is not a discussion today that is pro or con to data centers. This is a conversation to really start as a baseline for people to educate themselves, or to know where to go to get information, or to really understand what they are. Because for communities that we often deal with, SEAL, those communities that are often left behind, that are typically Black and Brown communities that this topic may affect the most, people aren't aware, don't understand, or don't know, because the intentionality around educating those communities, our communities, on these topics is never a priority. And it's a priority for SEAL. And so we wanted to create a platform within our webinar to really have this conversation, and provide as much information as possible on both sides. What you will see is we will be putting within the chat various resources that have come from some of our panelists, but our own research from our own strategy and innovation team and others engineering team within SEAL, of resources where to get creditable information, because we are living in a time where we don't know where can we get accurate, credible information. So we wanted to add that. And I also want to guide people to various energy affinity groups to be able to do that. So with that being said, I want to now pass over and have our introductions from each of our panelists. I'm going to start with EJ, because she's first, alphabetical by first name. And so you can introduce yourself and the role that you play and your investment in the topic around data centers. Welcome, EJ. How you doing?
Welcome. Thank you so much, Scott. Good morning to some and afternoon to others. My full name is Adila Jordan. I go by EJ. I serve as the Senior Director of Transformative Communities at Dream.org, where I also lead our Stop Toxic Tech Green the Grid campaign. Dream.org is a national organization, but I am located in Chicago, Illinois. Through our campaign, we focus on helping communities understand and engage in conversations around rapid expansion of data centers and AI infrastructure. We work alongside local leaders, community organizations, coalition partners to provide education, training, leadership development, organizing support, and opportunities for meaningful community engagement. Much of my work is focused in North Carolina. We are currently supporting local organizations and coalitions as they navigate questions around data center growth. What does it mean for energy demands, water resources, public health, land use, and community participation to be involved in actual local decision making? We recently hosted a distributed organizing and a lobby day training supporting the local constituents in North Carolina with their advocacy. They're preparing for a lobby day on June 24th, which is a week from yesterday. So, really excited about that. And we also prepare to launch a data center accountability fellowship where we'll help develop emerging leaders from HBCUs, historically Black colleges, who want to better understand the intersection of technology, infrastructure, and community engagement. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today because data centers are quickly becoming the hot topic, as we all know. And so our communities are truly at the forefront of asking the questions and need answers and accountability. So I really appreciate being here today. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, EJ, and for that amazing context. Um, I really am excited to hear your responses to so many of the questions because of the work that you do. So we are excited that you're here. Thank you.
Thank
How are
you.
you, Jeff?
I'm great. How are you?
I am good. If you would introduce yourself
Sure.
and the work that you do in relationship to data centers.
Sure. My name's Jeff Smith. Recently retired after 34 years with Southern Company. And a good part of the last several years there, we're trying to understand from a utility perspective, a customer perspective, and a regulatory perspective, the impacts of not just data centers, but extremely large load customers have on the community that they're coming into and the utility's ability to serve. A good part of that time was understanding what data center needs are, the speed at which they operate, again, the large loads that they put on the system when they come in and how to best serve those loads. Along with that, we did a significant amount of work in working with not only our regulators, but advocacy groups that had concerns around affordability or around health impact, water, not just electric energy. And since retiring, I'm working with other organizations such as the ACEEE and Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance and understanding those impacts uniquely in the Southeast. Customers in the Southeast have large heating loads, large cooling loads, and so there's affordability concerns with lots of the customers that are served in the Southeast. So we're working with utilities, data centers, and advocacy groups to figure out how to best partner to make sure the impacts on those communities are positive or as minimal as they can be if they're on the other side of the fence.
Awesome. I'm so happy that you're here, Jeff, as well, just to bring, again, a different perspective. And coming from, the South part of the country, just the different impacts and all of that, and how climate plays a game in that as well. So I'm super happy that you're here and always glad to talk to you. So thank you, Jeff.
Excited to be here.
Hello, Jonathan. You're muted.
Thought I turned it off. Sorry. How's it going?
Okay.
All right. So
go right ahead. Introduce yourself and the work that you do in this space.
Okay. So I'm Jonathan Kleinman, now the principal at 47 North Energy and a senior advisor at the Ad Hoc Group. I've been working in the energy efficiency and water conservation space over 25 years. And right now, my company works in the intersection of business, government and policy, and clean energy and climate. One of my projects right now is to develop a guidance document for the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. They're trying to understand the underlying business model that's driving data center development. So given the companies that are using and creating artificial intelligence, how do they make money? How are they trying to figure out how many of these data centers do they need and why? And then also who's involved in building these things and then turning them over, because there's a number of different development and ownership models. And so the people that you're interacting with when they come to the state are not necessarily the ultimate providers of the product, but you've got a number of intermediaries and speculators that are getting involved. And so they're just trying to understand how that's all shaking out and how it impacts energy and water.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. I do want to make aware to our guests that if you have questions, please put them in click the Q&A tab within the webinar and list your questions there. And as many that I can get to, I will be asking our panelists. Our first question, I'm going to start with Jonathan, since you were talking, is can we talk a little bit about, or as comprehensively as possible, and I want others to weigh in on this, what are data centers and what is their purpose?
Okay.
Let's start there.
All right.
Educating people. Okay.
Okay. A data center is a building that houses a lot of what are called racks or computers, but very, very powerful and very, very hot, literally temperature-wise, computers. And so if you look at it, there's three basic types. The one that we've known the most is called an enterprise, which is relatively small in terms of power demand. It can be up to maybe 10 megawatts of power demand. And those have been used by Department of Defense, government agencies, banks, large companies for a long time to provide security around the system itself and to make sure that their data doesn't get mingled with anybody else's data. On the opposite side of the spectrum is what's called a hyperscale data center. These are massive entities, maybe more than 100 megawatts in power demand. These are being built by Google, Meta, Microsoft. These are the ones that are providing massive amounts of computation capability and powering all of the different AI models. And then in between is what's known as a co-located or a multi-tenant facility, where somebody builds a building and then lots of different companies or a few different companies can put their own equipment in there. The building itself has to provide power, water, security staff, land, backup power. And so the data center itself is the housing container of this. It also needs a network connection to be able to spit out all the different IT services that it's providing.
Okay. Is there anything, EJ or Jeff, that you want to add? Go ahead, EJ. I saw you came off first.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to understand like what are the data centers being used for or who uses it. So honestly, every email we send, every movie we stream, every online purchase we make, every cloud-based application we use, and the increasing use of AI tools interact and rely on data centers. So just to really put it in a simple form, like we're using data centers when we may not even know that we are, because inherently. And I love what Jeff said. He mentioned the hyperscale data centers. I think just to put it into actual perspective, for instance, part of my campaign worked with a team in Memphis on Elon Musk's XAI data center. His first center is 785 square foot. And that's just a rough estimate, so that you can really understand what does hyperscale data center mean. I just think I wanted just to put a little some numbers to what that actually looks like. And so a lot of times they're put in marginalized communities, and that's something that has been creating the increase of conversations with the communities it's impacting most.
Jeff, I know you had something to add as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of highlight a point Jonathan made is data centers are not new. They've been around for decades. What is new or newer are these extreme hyperscalers. And Jonathan used an example of 100 megawatts or more. There are some of these things that get over 1,200 megawatts. So you're equaling the output of a nuclear generator for one customer. It's got that kind of a scale. These aren't small stick scale data centers like we've had around. It's very large, very rapid startup. And to EJ's point, it's driven by almost everything we do requires the output of these data centers. So I just wanted to bring that scale, as they can be extremely large.
And so with that extreme, and I heard your comparison, Jeff, with like nuclear. People still don't. I can't compare anything to nuclear. I don't know. So from like a community number of household, like what is the comparison, if you could, so people can really, from a basic standpoint, understand that. And thank you, EJ and Jonathan as well, for just really expanding and explaining, but also how we use them. Because I don't know if people understood, when you're pulling data and everything we do on these devices is pulling, and it's connected. And I think helping us understand that is valuable. But Jeff or anybody else, I see Jonathan came up. If you can give us a comparison, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, a relatively decent sized house with its air conditioning load on the hottest summer day is going to be about 5 kilowatts of power. So
Okay.
that 1,000 megawatt system that Jeff was talking about is about 200,000 homes. So, think about the fact that that data center is using roughly that amount of power all the time, or at least a good chunk of the time, depending on what the computation is. One of the things that regulators didn't necessarily know about, and keying off of what EJ was saying, is that the AI companies are selling what's called a token. And this is something I've learned, but the token is the term for it's roughly three-quarters of a word. It's a measurement of the language that's being processed, and that's what these LLMs or these large language models are dealing with. And so, and they sell things in the unit of millions of tokens, and that can be anywhere from a short video that you create can take like 2 million tokens. A simple query can only be like 10 tokens, but it's almost like the old telecom days when you were buying data from your phone provider, right? They're selling tokens and their business models are based around tokens and also the growth in what they think our future use is going to be based on what everybody's doing. And so again, these data centers are being built to supply the tokens that we're using, whether it's using a Google search that's got AI built into it already, or actually, generating some creative content.
And one thing, Scott, too, to bring forward though is while it is this usage is to Jonathan's point, one customer using the equivalent of 200,000 homes worth of energy. The difference there to point out, though, is most of these data centers, not all, but a good chunk of them run flat out all the time. 200,000 homes don't operate that way.
Right.
I mean, I think about my 80-something-year-old father that's up by 3:30 every morning watching the news at the highest volume possible on a television versus me waking up at what I would consider a normal hour. And then our child who has a place that's waking up at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. All those loads and houses are coming on and off and ramping up. So you might not need that full, large amount of energy constantly. You can manage it with a smaller amount throughout the day. These large data centers that need it continually require a different way of servicing them.
Yeah, that is a very great point to bring up. So thank you, Jeff. I'm going to switch over to EJ for my next question. And I see questions are coming in our Q&A, and I'm going to, I guarantee you, the ones that are there now, I'm going to get to. So EJ, talk a little bit about why, and I'm starting with you, why is this the topic of the day? I've been to, in the past 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, I've been to 4 or 5 sessions so I did a panel, today is Thursday, on Tuesday, with the Michigan EIBC in Lansing, Michigan. I'm in Michigan, and it was about affordability. Mm-hmm. And after the second question, we started talking about data centers, and everybody on the panel was like, okay, are we ready for this? And luckily I was ready only because I was prepping for this, but otherwise I'd been like, so why is this? I mean, I heard CEOs of utilities the other week. It was really about the future of grid placement, all that, but it immediately, the conversation went to data centers. You can look at the news, you can look at all types of things. There are uproars about them. There are communities that are fighting against them. Why is this the topic of the day?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Scott. I mean, we're having this conversation. It goes back to, I think Jeff and Jonathan alluded to this earlier, is that data centers have moved from being an invisible part of the internet to a very visible part of community planning and development. One of the things that we're seeing is that as data centers are being proposed, communities are not being informed. And so they start seeing these huge facilities pop up in their communities. There's an increase in noise. There's an increase of energy bills. All of these implications of something is happening, right, in community is going on, but then communities are trying to figure out what's going on. So like across North Carolina, we see that communities are really trying to understand how this rapid growth of data centers really truly impact the local priorities. And so some of the questions that come about are like, what does a data center mean for water resources? What does it mean for the energy grid? And I appreciate that, Jeff and Jonathan just spoke a bit about that. What does it mean for our energy bills? Well, will we absorb the cost of the increased use of energy in our communities? What does it mean for air quality? As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times data centers are in communities that are already marginalized who are suffering from asthma. So what does it mean for their public health? And so as communities are being more informed, they're becoming a bit more sophisticated in these conversations, and they're moving beyond just asking what it is and more now asking these deeper questions about accountability and transparency and then long-term planning. And so I think that as communities continue to get involved, they're looking for what safeguards are going to be put in place for us as data centers continue to expand in their backyards.
And to build on that, I'd say that it's having an effect on the way that the data center developers are engaging with communities, right? And so if it weren't for the fact that you would be seeing this kind of pushback, now all of a sudden data centers are showing up and saying, hey, we're going to invest in your community. We're going to create a net water positive data center. We're going to create or invest in demand flexibility. That wouldn't be happening if these communities weren't pushing back and making it more difficult for them to build these things faster. So I think it's been great what impact they're ultimately having.
So let's start with, what are the pros of data centers? What is okay, this is great, why? And I hear crickets.
And I'll jump off a little bit.
Oh yeah, I'll jump in too.
Yeah.
I'll go after Jeff.
So, I mean, the short answer from a non-utility perspective is they're there because the information is being asked for. I mean, data centers wouldn't exist if the need for the information wasn't there, or the need for everything we do in our day-to-day lives is so much more driven by data than it was in the past. Whether you're talking shopping, understanding your style, whether it's business purposes, whether it's crypto mining, it can be just about anything, but it's all driven by need. The other part that can be an advantage from an electric perspective, just to be quite honest, is while data centers have a huge load and growth on a system when they come in, they do help flatten out the generation needs. You don't have big peaks in the summer and big peaks in the winter. You can really start to flatten out generation. And what that does is it spreads the cost of those utility assets to the customers that use the most energy, not just divided by the number of customers you have. And what that can do, again, and I'm not saying data centers are the absolute best thing in the world for customers, but what I am saying is they can have the impact of flattening or reducing energy costs by 1% to 2% a year during those growth phases, when you spread those costs evenly across every kilowatt hour used, not just by who's using the kilowatt hour. So they do have some positives.
Yeah, I'll just add to that by saying as we've kind of alluded to, like they have become a significant part of how information moves, how organizations operate, and how people gain access to digital services to truly stay increasingly connected with the world. Again, it's become something that we're using without even realizing that we are. For instance, our healthcare systems charting now is digital. if you have gone to the doctor recently, a lot of times you have to go online to an app that's digital based. And so that's using a data center to store that knowledge. Emergency response systems, schools, government operations, even our banking, our cloud storage, our growing use of AI. So data centers do help power many of the systems in the modern society that we put demand on. So.
And there's a number of businesses that are starting to leverage it for utility operations and on the benefit of customers. There's a company called Home Boost that has an AI-driven do-it-yourself home energy audit that lets you at the house figure out where your energy problems are and take do-it-yourself tasks to move on it. There's one called Tree Swift, which is using AI to determine and anticipate what vegetation is going to grow around the power lines to help better manage that vegetation to prevent blackouts. There's a company called Cami that's got a product that's going to be providing an AI-driven energy advisor for low income or disadvantaged communities. So there's a number of entities that are figuring out how to leverage the capability and to offer products that people are looking for. And as both EJ and Jeff said, you don't get that without the computational power and also the connectivity of it. Finally, even though it's difficult for a tax assessor to figure out how much that parcel's worth, but you hear about tax breaks, but there's also what's known as payment in lieu of taxes or pilot. And so these data centers do put money into the community. And it's a question of what does the community where it's located, what are they able to leverage that investment for? I think the challenge is that neighboring communities don't get that benefit and they're still absorbing some of the impacts. And so there's a discussion to be had around how do you socialize both the benefits and the costs, real and external costs that come along from all the data centers.
And Jonathan, on top of that, you mentioned the benefit to communities is the tax benefits. I mean, you talk about a large data center coming into a small rural county. The taxes that business pays to that county in some cases can almost double the existing tax benefits. And so the citizens of that community receive the infrastructure upgrades, the road work, that they get to take advantage of some of that because of the revenue being generated in their county. So just wanted to throw that one in.
So I hear what you're saying. And so what you said, Jonathan, about it is bringing benefit to these communities where they are. Who decides what those benefits are? One, and you also alluded that the surrounding community. So when you say community, is it a city? Is it a town? Like, what do you mean when you say that? Is it a neighborhood? Like, when you say that, what typically is it the city? Or in some places, is it the county because of the size?
So I'm going to defer to EJ and Jeff here. I think it's whoever the taxing entity is, right? So it can be the municipality, it can be the county. It depends upon who's got the tax authority over the land and where that tax revenue goes.
Okay.
And so who decides is whatever board or group is in charge of that entity. So I'm going to stop there, and
Okay.
EJ and Jeff might be able to provide a more informed answer to that than I just did.
And I want to go to Jeff because Jeff, you also said that it brings tax benefits. And is that a standard, or is it I'm giving you tax breaks to build this data center, so I may not be bringing tax benefits? And is that a possibility? And what do we most likely see? And anybody else can go there, but I just wanted to get clarity because that's all. Okay.
Yeah. So no, that's a great question, Scott. So Tax breaks can sometimes be given at the state level, at the county level. I mean, that's up to the business development side of the state and community. But those tax breaks are usually for a finite period of time. They're for a few years, say 3, 5, and most 10 case. But you've got a business that's expected to be there and operate for 30 to 50 years. So it's a short term tax break in some cases for long term benefit. And when it's taxes, just like anything else, it's either up to the state or the local government that decides how they're distributed within that community. What is different, though, is some of these data centers are contributing large amounts of money to the community. So I'll use an example and I'll leave their name out. But there's one company that is working with Georgia Power and is contributing hundreds of thousands of dollars to help with affordability concerns. And between them and community activist groups along with the utility, they sit down and decide what are the best ways to spend those dollars with customers that are in the most need. I think about a lot of cases that we're looking at right now is those dollars are designated to homes to fix structural problems or to get clean titles on homes. So utility and state programs can then come in and do energy efficiency improvements. So if it's tax related, it's usually up to the local and county and city and state governments to define how it's used. If it's a philanthropic pool or a something along that line, it's up to the usually the advocate groups, the utilities, and the regulators within that area, along with the donating party, to determine how they're used.
I'll just add to that and state
I knew
that.
you had something. I was ready. I was ready.
To answer your question, okay, so many states and local governments offer tax incentives to attract data center investments. And so that's really important to know. I work with a lot of mayors from the African American Mayors Association, and I have sat in conversations, and that is the hot topic about about tax incentives. And this is why we need to bring the data centers. But those incentives can include sales tax exemptions on equipment, property tax abatements, and other economic development incentives. So, supporters will argue, though, that these incentives help attract the investment and in portions of the region to complete the technology of the infrastructure. At the same time, you have communities often ask the important questions, and what that might look like is, they're asking questions about whether the public benefits are proportional to the incentives being offered. They want to understand what is being given up in tax revenue, what commitments are being made by the developers, and whether local residents will ultimately see the meaningful benefit of these incentives. So they are often given for the incentives to push through the development, but those important questions are still need to be answered. And that is why transparency is so important. And communities should have access to that information about
Absolutely.
incentive packages, project benefits, infrastructure costs, and long-term impact so that they can evaluate the true picture of what that incentive means for their community.
And so that leads me really to the next question is what we often hear more. What are the cons?
So one con that people don't talk about is the fact that a data center produces photons, basically. Like they produce stuff that goes out on the fiber optic network cable. And so they don't need rail, they don't need roads, they don't need the other kinds of things that another business would potentially need. If you build a data center, that site is only really going to be good for another data center. So if you choose to give that land over to that type of development, that's the only option that you're going to have. And so it's a significant investment for a very narrow window of possibility. So it's very difficult to redevelop. And so one of the cons that people think, because the economy and the business model hasn't shaken out yet, is what's the risk of a stranded cost? And a stranded cost means you've invested water, you've invested power, you've invested energy, you've invested land.
Mhm.
And if that doesn't shake out, because who knows where the AI business model is going, um, you've already committed a lot of resources to that particular piece of infrastructure. So I just want to, so from my perspective, I think one of the more significant cons is the gamble, and the risk in something that seems like a safe bet, but we're not really sure yet.
I'd add that because many of the data centers are actually powered by AI, you'll often hear that, oh, they're going to bring thousands of jobs to communities. Yes, they do. They bring the construction jobs, but once they are built, then they're powered by AI. So then those jobs are no longer available. So I think it's important to know that long-term job placement is not actually true as it becomes as it relates to data center development. We have talked about the significant public health concerns. The data centers can be linked to the respiratory illnesses I mentioned by increasing asthma rates and things of that nature. Jonathan spoke about the computers are being very hot. So, what happens with hot computers? How do they cool them down? Well, they cool them down with water. So then you now have, you would now have communities that can now experience water disparity, right? And so we talked about energy demands already. One thing that people don't know, and I appreciate community members raising this because some of them have it in their backyard, they're loud. Large facilities often operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the cooling systems for the water to cool down the computer systems, that equipment actually operates and it produces persistent noise. So communities can hear that overnight while they're asleep. And then, of course, that affordability part that we talked about in the conversation is as communities, accommodate new development, questions often arise on who bears the costs
Yeah.
associated with the infrastructure.
And then I think the last part that I'll add, because EJ and Jonathan have done a really amazing job of hitting them, is it's the newness and the competition for resources. Um, those with the most money can afford to buy the stuff and bring it with them. Ordinarily utilities were used to customers show up, we build the infrastructure that serves them. These data centers and other large loads are showing up and saying, we'll bring the transformers, we'll bring whatever we need if we can just get moving. And so they get those because they have the ability to buy them outright on their own. So there's that. And this is Jeff. This isn't speaking from any customer that I serve. There's also just the newness of this. This is new, and people
Yeah.
aren't sure about the impacts. They're nervous about it. Is it going to make their personal situation better or worse? We see the way things are trending right now, and so that adds a lens to people's way of looking at it. There are concerns that are genuine and real, but that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities to potentially overcome those as we have a little more time. But I think lack of experience adds to that fear and the negative side of the business for data centers.
So the first question that we have is, what strategies are utilities using to soothe customer concerns regarding rising bills with data centers coming into their communities? Don't laugh, Jonathan.
So, so, so there's what they're doing and then how they're communicating it to the public. Those are two separate. I was more thinking about the latter than the former, right? So utilities are creating what are known as large load tariffs. These tariffs are essentially saying, you data center, you are going to pay for the cost associated with this expansion to address and satisfy your load. To Jeff's point earlier, The concern is that on the infrastructure side, are the rest of the ratepayers going to help socialize the cost of providing the power to that data center? And so utilities are putting in place approaches to make sure that these large loads are paying their way. Now, if they are trying to use the same energy that other people are using, that creates more demand with less supply. That can cause the cost to go up, right? And so in some cases, data centers are bringing their own supplies of energy also to help offset that cost impact. So, and then finally, utilities do studies to understand the effect of that large load on the transmission system overall. So I'd say, there's something called the interconnection queue, which is essentially the list of projects that they got to look through to figure out what the impact is going to be. You've got what's called a large load tariff, which is to help people pay their way. So, slowly but steadily, they are putting some things in place that are helping to address just making sure that these large loads are paying their way to help address the impact on infrastructure.
And they're also working with regulatory bodies. I've got some information that I believe will get dropped in the notes section, but it's a data center fact sheet from the Georgia Public Service Commission that outlines the efforts that have been put in place to protect customers from absorbing cost of this unknown business. Again, we expect them to be here for this long. We expect them to use this amount of energy. That doesn't necessarily mean it plays out that way. So utilities are looking at regulators and working with them. And then that Georgia example is just a case that shows the amount of effort that's going into place to make sure those costs are absorbed by the cost causer, not by all other customers. So utilities are working through that light. They're working through rate structures, as Jonathan said. And they're also working through, any other development and grid enhancement procedures they can look at to potentially serve these customers without necessarily just having to build new load to do it all the time. And some of that can be demand side management programs, offering incentives to customers to build these data centers as efficient as possible, to operate them as efficient as possible, also to give them, in some cases, breaks if they curtail their use in times of critical peak and let us use their own site generators in some cases to backfeed the grid. All of those are ways that utilities are looking at making sure they have the ability to serve all customers when the need is there.
So, I love this next question. Are you seeing any of the efficiency measures being taken in Europe here in US, such as undergrounding data centers or capturing the heat they produce to heat communities in the winter months? I love this question because I think what we should start doing is looking at global models and not just what's happening here, because some communities are a little further ahead than we are. So have you seen any of this happening in communities? I saw you come off, Jonathan.
I've heard conversations about this. Some of the challenges are, and this addresses like the combined heat and power question as well. If you're trying to site a data center far away from people because of the noise impact, then what you're doing is you're taking that heat load and moving it far away from people as well. And so you can't very easily capture that heat and then move it to the neighboring community, not to mention the distribution system that's required to effectively move that heat from the data center location to wherever people are going to use it. It's a significant infrastructure challenge. There's money for that investment, but you've got competing priorities. And so I'm not sure in Europe where you're moving the heat around, what's the mechanism that you've got? There are discussions about putting the data centers underwater or closer to large bodies of water to be able to take advantage of that heat sink. But then you've got corrosion if it's salt water. Like there's trade-offs everywhere. And so it's, again, I think that as a result of community starting to push back, you're forcing the conversation for these issues and these ideas to be brought to the fore. But I haven't heard a ton of examples of this actually happening yet.
And there'll be a period of time, Scott, too, that I think utilities and other organizations, things like EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, ACEEE, as we talked about earlier, they're working to understand which of those models may apply in the US, and is there an opportunity to pilot some of that to make sure it does work the way it's intended and doesn't have unintended negative consequences. Utility rates also play into what makes sense to do with some of those types of products. And so understanding how that balances as well. But I think it'll be one of those things that it's not going to not get looked at. It's just so new that it's getting started into that innovation space now.
So our next question, and thank you. Are CHPs or micro CHPs applicable at these type of facilities?
Do we know if that question is intended for their, like, as for backup generation or their primary source of generation?
Let's answer it both ways.
Should have known that was coming. So, yes, some of these customers are looking at self-generation. How do they generate for themselves? Do they island themselves off from the grid? Others are looking at it strictly as backup, as a redundancy or a duplicative source of generation if needed. So yes, that is happening, but there are rules and regulations that are different in every part of the country. Every state has its own regulatory environment, its own set of rules. Some states won't allow any self generation unless it is specifically for their need. Others will allow them to generate and backfeed on the grid any onto the grid any excess. So it's happening, but there's a lot of regulation, and unfortunately, these customers operate across many states, and if not all states in most cases. And so it's incredibly cumbersome for them to understand all the rules and regulations around the country. But it is happening. It's just not happening at large scale, I would say, at this point. I mean, Jonathan, EJ, I don't know if y'all feel differently about that.
No, I think, Jeff, you hit it right on the head. I mean, to my understanding, that CHP systems are being explored in some contexts because they can improve the overall energy efficiency by capturing the use of energy that might otherwise be wasted, rather they're operating from a specific facility demands on a variety of factors, including energy needs, infrastructure, economics, and regulatory considerations. But from my perspective, the important question for communities is less about the specific technology and more about the outcomes. Communities really want to know whether a proposed approach will reduce environmental impacts, improve efficiency, and strengthen reliability and reduce the burdens to the residents. So whether we're talking about CHPs or micro CHPs, advancing cooling technologies or other innovations, communities are increasingly interested in understanding what measures are being taken to minimize the impacts on the energy system.
Thank you. This next question, it's two questions. The first one is for Jonathan. Anybody else I could answer, but it's in response to your definition, Jonathan. And you did give very defined boxes around data centers when you talked about the enterprise, the hyperscale. The question is, are there centralized or energy standard resources available to define data center segments based on size and or connected load?
I didn't find any, and I was digging around. So I saw a lot of inconsistent information about how do you know what the different sizes are. And so what I gave you was kind of an eyeballed range of
Okay.
averages, right? So no. and they start to blend into one another. Like like as Jeff said, a lot of folks will say that a hyperscale is 100 megawatts or more, but tons of them are hitting the 1 gigawatt range, like 1,000
Right.
megawatts. And the enterprise ones are historically much smaller. Co-locators, even within that, and co-location also has an energy definition as well if you talk to regulators, so you have to be careful. Because co-location can mean the fact that you've got on-site power. So in this case, I'm talking about a multi-tenant data center. So you've got multiple companies operating within it. There's retail, which means that it supports enterprise level. There's wholesale, which means it's bigger. Or you can have a co-locator that's only hosting a hyperscaler. And I think this is one of the things that really concerns people about this is that if Caterpillar or Archer Daniels Midland is going to come into your community, you know who's showing up and you know what they are. Because the rush to market is so fast, there are entities that are coming in to build a data center that actually have nobody lined up for the downstream operation. This is a market where there's a lot of speculation going on. People are building well in advance of the need. And so people, and there's a lot of confidentiality that is at play right now because businesses don't want to tip their hand about what's going on. And so if you're trying to figure out who's building a large load, you don't know if it's Google or some developer that Google has hired or some speculator that's not talking to anybody. They just want a piece of the action. And so there's a big aspect to the uncertainty in who's building it and what information that you can get. And that drives a lot of the feelings around like what's coming in. And I'm mostly talking about the largest ones right now, but it can even operate, if somebody told me in interviews that if you create a large load tariff at 75 megawatts and above, you're going to get a lot of proposals for 74 megawatt data centers. And so like people are just trying to figure out how to move fast and they're looking for the path of least resistance.
And is any of that impacted by those segments? And I know you kind of spitballed them, but do they change at all because of geography?
That's also a great question. Some geographies that have seen a lot of data center development, like Northern Virginia, for example, are like data centers love going to places that already have data centers because they know that there's power, there's the network that they need, but now you're starting to see community pushback. I don't think that you get differences in size, although if you're in a water constrained area, like there's going to be a limit to how big you can get based on your cooling resource. I have not seen any discussion yet about the differences in how big of a hyperscale facility you can build related to geography. It's more like, can you build it or not? EJ or Jeff, have you seen anything like that?
In the Southeast, geography really isn't, at least it hasn't reared its head as being a big concern because there are vast areas of most of the southern states that are still very agricultural, very rural, and have the ability to expand. They're not space location constrained, but they could be grid constrained. I mean, to your point earlier, data centers tend to want to build where other data centers are for redundancy and duplicative surface and proven reliability. But that may not be the best place from a utility perspective to put it. If those systems are overloaded, you can't just drop and go. If you go to a substation or an area that has some availability, it can be much easier and much faster. So some of that drives customer a location as well as where can they get up and running as quick as possible, not just does the site hold them.
Thank you. EJ, I'm going to start this question with you, and we have about 5 minutes left. So this question, and you alluded to the workforce stuff earlier, it's the jobs with the construction, not after. So This question says, I've seen some labor organizations seem to be pro data. And I'm wondering now if those labor organizations are in the construction trades, because that would make sense. But what opportunities do they create for the workforce, whether it's in the building or running of those data centers? And you kind of alluded to that earlier. You're still muted, EJ. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that it's an important distinction that many of the labor organizations that have engaged in these conversations are often looking at the construction phase, which I kind of mentioned a bit earlier, because building these large data centers can create significant demands for skilled trades, electricians, contractors, and other construction related jobs. One of the questions community are often seeking, however, is what happens after that construction, right? I mentioned earlier that these data centers are often powered by AI. And so data centers do create permanent jobs, but generally not in the same scale as some other types of infrastructures and commercial developments. That's why communities want that clearer answer. And so I think that the conversation is increasingly shifting from simply asking how many jobs are being created to, what types of jobs and opportunities. And to be honest, a lot of those haven't been answered. And from my perspective, workforce development is an important part of the conversation, but it should still be viewed alongside other considerations such as the public health. But a lot of times it is very minimal jobs that are offered after. It could be, operating, the day ins and day outs of the facility itself, but nothing that I have heard of significant job increase and opportunities in community.
Thank
And
you.
I think, I mean, potentially though, too, just to add on real quick, or Scott, is while those jobs, especially those trade jobs for construction, are a very limited time as it relates to the development of those facilities, having those trained contractors in space to do other things like energy efficiency and demand response programs um, is a longer term way of using that labor. And it also helps bring wealth to the community that those people live in. So there's that advantage. You just have to be deliberate in making sure you take use of that labor once it's trained.
Thank you. So what I would like to do now, as my last question, and I do want to just acknowledge to people that they're in the chat, their resources that are listed. We're also going to email them out to everybody that registered. And I think answer some of these questions that we're not going to have time to get to, but I do want to hear from you all. What are things that communities should be doing now to address any of their issues? How should they be prepared? What should they be doing? And I'm going to start with Jeff.
I mean, I think educating themselves is the first part, not being scared to push back and ask questions. When I think about communities, both activists, everyday folks that are just trying to figure out how to get by, and figuring out how to pay their bills, how to pay, their gas, how to, eat, just do all those day-to-day life choices, is arm yourself with your resources, know your regulators, know their public comment opportunities, know where to show up for utilities to talk with them, making sure that you create that time and effort and learn those resources and not be scared to push back on what you don't know. But also making sure that we're as open to the total conversation, not just a point of view. We all have points of view, right? The reality is usually somewhere blended in all those perspectives. And so asking questions, and pushing back where you're unsure, but also making sure you're listening to other people's perspectives and thoughts, not just from any one source.
Jonathan?
So I've learned a couple of new acronyms. We've heard of NIMBY for a long time. Banana means build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. CAVE is also citizens against virtually everything, right? So there's a sense that people just don't want change at a time when there's a lot of change happening across the country. I think it's important for people to consider what they want out of economic growth in their community and what kind of economic growth they're looking for. Like, you can't hold the line because there's too many people who are lacking basic needs and jobs that everybody needs. And like it or not, and for good or for ill, this is the economic development that's happening in this country right now. So the question is, if you want jobs to increase or you want investment in your community, what kind do you want? Your economic development corporation is the right place to have that conversation. And then people should work and with that group to be proactive about the kinds of investment that you're looking for. And then how do you leverage these as opportunities to improve the grid, improve your resources, improve your community if you can, or decide that this is something that you don't want. But the Economic Development Corporation is a great place to get started.
EJ.
I love to say get informed, get organized, and get engaged as community members as early as possible in the data center development process. When communities do become aware of proposed projects, they can actually seek information. It's okay. Like, don't be afraid to, ask those important questions and understand how data center developments will affect their public health, water, energy demands that we talked about earlier today. Some of the important questions that I know community members are asking is, what will water facilities, how much water will facilities actually use? How will the noise and other qualities of life be impacted? How will they actually be addressed, right? These are common questions that you can talk to your local legislator about. In North Carolina, I talked about how they're organizing. There's 100+ people signed up to go lobby and talk to their legislator about their concerns about data centers. They have put in place moratoriums just to create a space for additional community input and discussions about appropriate safeguards before development actually moves forward. So preparing the residents to engage in these conversations is just equally important. I would just say those three things is super important: is to get informed, get organized, and get engaged.
Thank you. We've gone over a couple of minutes. I'm sorry, everybody, but this has been a very engaging and informative conversation. I would like to thank our panelists, EJ, Jeff, and Jonathan, for bringing your expertise and your perspective to the work. Again, not only are resources in the chat, we will email those out to everyone. I want to remind everyone this webinar will be posted on our website within the next 24 hours. And because we're not open tomorrow, because it is Juneteenth, it might take until Monday. It is Juneteenth. I have to say that. So we are going to get the information out to you, and we encourage you to continue the conversation, because we do think it's important to do that. And we'll also try to get these questions that were left in the Q&A answered as well in the email that we send out. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We will see you next quarter for our next webinar. And I encourage you also to go on our website and look at past, where we've had great topics talking about some awesome things such as clean energy and workforce development and how to tell your story. Just so many different things. Energy affordability, which is another hot topic right now. So we encourage you to check out those conversations and allow us to be a space for you to get information and have these genuine conversations. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.